Chauncey, I gotta call you, Chauncey. Catch up. Peace, Erica. What's up? Just give it a little time for the stream to populate, and then we'll get started. Who? Who's Alpha Kane? Who that? Yeah. Boogie Down Production. See, y'all think B Nice the only person that could drop tunes? Peace, Tanya. Hey, sis. Mawari. So what's your problem? It seems you want to be KRS2. From my point of view, backtracks would be attack. Cause KRS1 sees simply one KRS. That's it, that's all. Single solo, no more, no less. I built up my credential financially and mental. Anytime I rhyme, I request the instrumental. I speak clearly, and that's nearly, or should I say I'm near, up from my career. I'm really not into fashion or praise, just the one who pays and how soon I get a raise. You're probably in the days. Oh, let me stop. That wasn't me, that was from the original song Poetry. Anyway, let's get started, y'all. Democratic Poetry. All right. Let's fade it out. All right. Poetry. Blastmaster KRS1. The late, great Scott LaRock, BDP. Anyway, I don't know why this is chiming. But anyway, today is April 8th in the year of your Lord, 2020. Bro.Diallo, Quarantine Chicago, broadcasting out of the sanctuary hypocrisy of the quarantine city. This is another Q&A. I'm thinking of doing some other stuff while we upon lockdown, maybe digital book reviews and various texts. Maybe let's start up a reading or book club, something, just to keep our minds sharp for when we can go back out in the street and engage with our people and start to organize for our liberation. So I'm here. Any questions you have on any issues, if I don't know the answer, I'm happy to admit that I don't, and perhaps we can suss out or guide each other towards the answer. So, but what I can answer, I will do with all honesty and sincerity that I can. And I know I have issues skipping by folks' questions. I will try to do better with going down the line, but sometimes I don't. So let's begin. Any questions anyone has for Bro.Diallo? I'm on Facebook Live and on YouTube. And feel free to share this, Twitter, wherever you want. Likes, subscribe, share, and invite as many people. And again, share with your friends, lovers, enemies, allies, and anyone else you think is either deserving or unworthy, but you want to annoy them with some Pan-African revolutionary insights. So, no alter ego today. I don't know what y'all talking about. Let's move forward. Y'all looking back. That's the problem with us. Let's look forward. I don't know of this person. The mask. Any mask will do. Okay, first question I thought would be related to Corona. As far as what the officials say with the N95 mask, different masks have different properties and different effects. Some masks are to protect the wearer. Some masks are to protect others besides the wearers. When I worked in the clinical setting as a technologist, I remember we were only allowed to wear a mask to protect the other people. Like in the OR, you wore the mask not to to protect yourself, but to protect the patient who was opened up in a sterile environment. So those masks were there to prevent you from expelling or particulates, saliva from yourself onto the patient. Um, when you go into isolation units, there were certain masks for people with immunosuppressive conditions, and there were certain masks with people with highly infectious diseases. And those were two different masks. By and large, I think the mask thing is more so about preventing those who have the disease from expelling it through sputum, and to prevent people from making contact with their mucosal membranes, their nose and oral passages. And as long as you're not in a clinical setting or with known concentrations of infected people, I think that the wide variety of masks and even the bandanas serve that purpose. But if you are a clinician, a healthcare provider, or you work with someone that you know is susceptible or infected or infectious, I think you have to get the medical grade N95 or better. But if you're just going to get your pack of hot dogs from Piggly Wiggly, um, and you don't want to expose your mucous membranes, and you're not going to be in any concentrated ongoing contact with infected or vulnerable people, I use my old, if I deem the mask necessary, I just use those old painter masks that help protect you from paint fumes. Bernie. I sent a message to the Bernie campaign. Bernie, uh, Bernie has an issue. Bernie claims he wants to change the status quo by following the rules of the status quo, which is not a contradiction because he is a democratic socialist. And where democratic socialists differ from true socialists is that democratic socialists are under the false impression or the fallacious impression that you can use democratic means to displace capitalism and the capitalist, meaning that if you write a rule or regulation that directs a capitalist to surrender their control of the means of production or surrender their power or their abundance of resources, then they will follow that law. And we have too many grand examples of that not working. But so that's the whole issue with reformism. But the reason I support Bernie and his reformist campaign is because the nature of capitalism now, where it is destroying ecosystems, driving animal species into extinction, there are certain non-recoverable conditions that are being imposed by the state and the economy. And any politician that we can put in office as revolutionaries that will act as stewards or preservationists over some of these non-recoverable institutions and ecosystems, I think it is prudent for us to do so. So if I must have a president, there should be no United States. But if I must have a president of the United States, I would prefer one that would enforce the Clean Air Act, water preservation, that would respect UN treaties on everything from weapons in space to the resource exploitation of the Arctic, the Endangered Species Act, things of that nature. So you have to acknowledge let's look at it from another clinical point of view. Example, if someone has a disease and you are working to develop a comprehensive treatment plan for that disease, but in the meantime, as you're developing that comprehension and taking them, and you can do things like help them with tooth decay, basic hygiene, meal planning, you don't negate those things because you don't say, well, I'm not going to deal with basic meal planning and hygiene because that's not going to cure the cancer. We are seeking to cure the cancer, but we're also seeking to when we take over the world, when the revolution comes, what kind of world will we inherit? What will be the state of the world we inherit? So even though I don't support the Democratic Party, I don't even support Bernie. I think his platform would be a more viable platform as we transition from an inhumane system of global white domination to a humane system of of socialism and Pan-Africanism. One second. Say. So that's my thought on Bernie. I think that Bernie is unwilling to level up. Bernie wanted to reform the status quo. The status quo told Bernie, absolutely not. So Bernie is in a very key position to disrupt the status quo, to blow up the status quo. But he says it's kind of like a debate between Dr. King and Kwame Ture. Kwame Ture supported nonviolent integrationist protest. He supported it. He marched with King. He sang hymns with King. And he tried to get King to enter the conversation of what do we do if this integrationist marching Jesus shit doesn't work? What if nonviolence is proven to be ineffective? And Dr. King didn't have an answer. Dr. King said, I will get freedom for my people through nonviolent protest by appealing to the morality and the good nature of our oppressor. And if I can't get it that way, then I don't get it. Whereas Kwame Ture says, well, if we can't get it peacefully, we're willing to employ other means beyond peace, violence, subversion, revolution. If we can't get peace in America, then we will, as fighting as American citizens for our constitutional rights, we will make a worldwide revolution. And if we can't get freedom within America, then we're willing to even destroy America. So Bernie Sanders is electoral politics, constitutional and legislative reform, appealing to the masses, implementation and incremental change. And Bernie Sanders, as old as he is, seems to can't move beyond that. And so that's a lot of liberals and reformists take that position. But whenever we're in a position to get a true reformist in, I think we should push those candidates. You know, I voted for Bernie. He's going to drop out and endorse Biden or the Democrats in general. And so that's where we depart. Just because I've supported him in the primary does not tie me to him or any other politician or bureaucrat. You know, I'm there. It was a alliance of convenience, and it no longer speaks to my interests, so I'm out of that shit altogether. So that's my thoughts on Bernie. Send his ass out to pasture and bury the man, continue the plan. That's my conclusion about Sanders and his presidential candidacy. Carl, good evening, Bro.Diallo. Talk about police culture and the glorification of law enforcement in American society. Well, that's actually not an ongoing thing. You know, it's very curious because you find, I mean, in terms of glorification of the police have always had a complex relationship with American society. And when I say American society, I'm talking about white people. White people have not always viewed the police and don't consistently view the police in a positive light. Remember, the very first COINTELPRO programs, I say this all the time, everything white people do to black people, they use themselves as guinea pigs. Africans did not arrive on white people, Europeans did not arrive on Africa's shores and then develop techniques for enslavement, genocide, systematic rape, colonization. They arrived at Africa's shores having already refined those skills over centuries against each other. Ask a Scottish man, ask an Irish man. You know, there are several. Ask a Roma, a Gypsy Roma person, ethnic group. Ask a European Jew or Khazar, whatever you want to call them. They can tell you. Ask a woman in Europe, you know, about genocide and mutilation and rape. And so it's the same thing with policing. Long before they had a Marcus Garvey, not long before, but before they had a Marcus Garvey to infiltrate and a UNIA to subvert, before they had a Du Bois to systematically develop files on the OSS and later the FBI, CIA, long before that, there were white anarchists, anarcho-syndicalists, the Wobblies movement, everybody from Smedley Butler to I knew his name was going to escape me as soon as I tried to say it. The socialist candidate for president. He ran for Eugene Debs. He ran for president while in prison and got like a good, 6-7% of the vote. It was a pretty significant majority for a third party candidate who was in jail at the time he was running. Right now, we have a candidate running for U.S. president who's in prison, Vice President Leonard Peltier. That's a whole nother discussion. But the police, the Pinkerton Security Agency, they do it. So white folks, you will find that there's music, there were folk songs that were just as anti-police as NWA, fuck the police. There were anti-police marches. And so white folks love the police when they are preserving the white pathology, the status of white people. But within that bubble of whiteness, there are groups of people when the white folks have to be subjected to the very thing they subject other people to, they lose it. So white people have a love, hate, in, out, up, down relationship with their law enforcement and their military. So you'll find that blue lives matter when it comes to black children being gunned down in the streets. But when their child gets pulled over for just a little hashish, or when they are being investigated by insider trading and the FBI, remember, even this whole thing of black glorification of black criminals and black gangs, the mafia, the Irish mafia, the Jewish mafia, of course the Italian mafioso, the rebel, Billy the Kid. When the policing agencies go after these folk heroes, folk heroes, white folks are very hostile toward the police. Go back and look at a lot of the mafia movies and that were really popular in the 70s and 80s, and some of the more recent ones. You'll find that the police are not shown in a favorable light. So white people love the police. The white masses view the police as an entity to protect their standing and status. And they don't care if the police break the law to protect their standing and status. But they are very much hypocritical. Racism is an irrational system. So the same people the same white communities that say, we don't trust the government, we don't like taxes, we want our liberty, we want to water the tree of liberty with the blood of tyrants, are the same people that turn around and say, blue lives matter, the blue wall, or thin blue line between freedom and anarchy. So anytime we try to look for rationality or consistency, the same people that talked about personal responsibility and family values are the same people voting for Donald Trump, who never takes responsibility for anything. And before he's done being president, he'll probably have another mail order bride that's a quarter of his age to prostitute bride to have sex with. So as far as white people glorifying the police, they will glorify the police today and protect the police from black protest and black resentment, and the very next week turn around and try to defund the police department or make a blockbuster movie showing how corrupt the cops are, where there's a lot of movies like that. So we should, in terms of police culture and white people glorifying, there is no consistent pattern, as in the book Iceman's Inheritance and in Urugu, the only consistent behavior patterns we see coming out of the West, out of Western culture from white folks, whether they are British, American, whatever, or any people who identify as right, is aggression, aggression, mass accumulation. They want to attack, they want to take, and they want to kill. I mean, Derek Jensen said it's a death cult, or that European culture has a death urge. And so if the police are killing for them, yay. If the police are using their authority to stop killing or to stop injustice against minorities, then the police become liberal, social engineer, Marxist Bolsheviks. So don't ever look to say, well, this is how white people feel about the police. They feel about the police changes on a daily basis. Right now, if there's a concerted effort to fight against police brutality, then they will garner white sympathy. But they can lose it just like that. Okay, let's see. It's Facebook. I don't see any questions on Facebook. Oh, wait. Scotty asked, Have you spoken on Sanders dropping out of the presidential race? I think I did, yeah. So, Dominique asked, how do we go about divesting from the status quo in a realistic way? There is no way to fully divest from the status quo. Good question. Because this is a pervasive status quo that innervates every element of existence. If you go up into the upper stratosphere and just outside the gravitational pull of the earth, you will find debris. If you look at the space pollution or space debris, they have literally polluted outer space. So the planet is not just surrounded by satellites, but there are toxic substances and debris and literally trash and hard frozen feces ejected from the space station floating around in space. If you go down to the deepest trenches of the ocean, they pull organisms from the deepest trenches of the ocean that have never been exposed to sunlight in their entire evolution. And they find that their digestive system is full of plastic and their circulatory system is full of pollution. So there is no complete divestment from the system. Black leaders who promote the idea that we can move back to Africa or that we can move to some region in America and call it New Africa, or we could, somehow earn enough money to encapsulate ourselves in some type of economic cocoon, or we can be so African and wearing African garb and speaking an African language and worshiping African gods, and that will create a cultural cocoon for us to be free of Western. All of those are illusions, and they are selling you pipe dreams. There is no escape. There is no sanctuary. The only option we have is to to acknowledge the system, its power and totality, and engage it, confront it. While we do that, we have to sustain ourselves. So we can divest, but and this is a tricky thing, because a lot of times social, cultural, material separation from the masses often breeds cults. You get individuals that'll get a population of engaged African people and say, well, we're going to dress different, we're going to eat different, we're going to even talk different than the masses. And then you think you're going off to join some revolutionary formation, and you end up in a cult. And to the point where you can't even properly engage or communicate with Black people of the community, and you can't be a revolutionary and be a part and so insulated from the common people. So there are means that we can have through engaging in what I call grassroots socialism. True socialism must, number one, take away private property, private ownership, ban exploitation, profit, and people who work receive the earnings from. So true socialism is a larger scope, but you can do grassroots socialism of having concrete networks of cooperation and sharing resources, whether that's a material resource or an immaterial resource. If you have someone in your community that is a speech coach, or that knows how to type, or knows martial arts, or knows how to grow food, you have somebody in your community that has material resources where they can help people stay above water economically, then you do an assessment of what those materials are and the proper way to share or to redistribute those resources, first to those with the most need, then to those who contribute in terms of their input, and then to the larger community, in order to encourage people to come into the community and to demonstrate the viability of your ideology. You can divest that way. Another way to divest is not by saying, I'm not going to see any Marvel movies, I'm not going to listen to any of this music out here, but to critically engage everything in your environment. So you could still watch movies. I know some people, oh, I don't own a TV. I mean, and a lot of times people don't own a TV for the very purpose of being able to make that grand statement. It doesn't mean shit. I think better than to isolate yourself from the media that your cousins, your little nieces and nephews, your brothers and sisters, your lover might be consuming, is by critically engaging with that. And that is a divestment because the masses of the people do not engage in critical analysis and critical thinking, reading, study, reflection, review, discussion. And then as you learn new things, as you come to greater levels of understanding, again, you're a socialist. So you share it with as many people as possible. And as you get feedback, you strengthen your argument. So you advocate for Pan-Africanism, you advocate for revolution, you bring in as much resources as you can for the community, and you properly distribute them. And when we have those networks working, then we can begin to dismantle, to attack the most vulnerable and accessible systems and institutions of global white domination, whether that's a parasitic business or parasitic behavior or parasitic individual within your community. You can start to target and unseat people in positions of authority, whether it's an alderman, a congressman, a school teacher, a principal, or anybody in a position of authority. You expose them, their harm that they're doing, and you come up with plans to unseat them, and you just keep leveling up. You keep building networks. You keep integrating people into the system. You keep demonstrating to people outside your movement, outside your community, outside your ideology, how viable it is. You know, you reward people who hold to agendas. You sanction people who violate, oppose, or betray agendas. You know, so it's systematic. But do not allow anyone to come to you and tell you that there is some physical or cultural space you can go to escape any of this, because there isn't. You know, there just isn't anywhere. There's no space in here and no space out there where you can go to escape this omnicidal system. Omnicide means death of everything. I can't say this often enough. This system is destroying the life-sustaining capacity of the planet Earth. And therefore, it doesn't matter. You might go to find a place of temporary relief, you know, and if you have the resources, you got the money and the passport to do that, I'm not going to shame you for doing it. The only time I have a problem with people doing that, running to sip julep in Ghana, or running to Brazil to live on the beach and you know, to live a good life, is if they claim they're doing it for some higher reason. You know, nobody wants to say I'm escaping, I'm running, I'm retreating. But they try to, oh, I'm a revolutionary, so I'm moving home to Africa. And they go to Africa and live like every other colonizer, you know, using the exchange rates, the poverty of Africa, the desperation of Africans to take advantage of that so that they can live good. But I know some other people, Pete O'Neill, I remember Dale Jones, before he passed, a lot of people repatriate to Africa to continue the work. So if you're like, I'm going to continue to fight, but I don't want to fight on this soil, you feel free to go anywhere you think that you can be most effective, or that you think will best affect you to be the most effective freedom fighter. But don't ever think you're going anywhere to escape. You go there to continue the struggle. Do you think the idea of universal basic income can be revolutionary, or is it just another tool to sustain capitalism? No, universal basic income is not revolutionary. It could be regressive, it could be authoritarian, it could be racist. I'm not against people getting a universal income. I do not think that universal basic income will sustain capitalism, because if you still have mass accumulation, it will always be inadequate. It will always be inadequate. So universal basic income under capitalism becomes, under racism, under imperialism, provide some short-term relief for those who receive it, but in the long term, it's like raising the minimum wage. You know, giving people $15 an hour. They could raise the minimum wage to $1,500 an hour. It would make no difference under a capitalist system, because the levels are not what matters. It's the framework. It's the framework. That's like saying, well, we're going to build a prison using bricks and stones as opposed to glass and steel. It's still a fucking prison. It's just the building materials are different, but the function is the same. With an economy, you must have a ceiling, not just a floor. What universal basic income or elevated a living wage does is puts a floor on the economy. But if you do not have a ceiling, meaning that you don't put limitations on the capitalists on how much of the resources they can do, you don't put limitations on corporations and how vast they can grow their monopolies, then what you're doing is just raising the bar. So the floor moves here and the ceiling moves higher, and the floor moves higher and the ceiling moves higher. So you still have this not just material differences, but you also have this power differential. So the people with, if you have universal basic income, I get an extra $1,200 a month, and Bill Gates gets an extra $1,200 a month. You know, who still has the power to go to Congress, to go to my local state or city government and says, well, implement this policy. You know, we're going to implement that policy. We're going to give the police more weapons grade military material. We're going to do this surveillance, and I can buy, which I'm not looking down on. I can buy more organic tofu. It's King Dita talking about make my own tofu. What am I, a peasant? So I can buy more organic tofu, you know, and that's nothing to shake a stick at. I support Meals on Wheels. I support food stamps. I support Medicaid. I support universal basic income. But I don't have the illusion that that is revolution. Revolution is when the apparatus of power and control of the resources changes hands. That's the revolution. Anything you do with the same power structure in place is a reform. And most of those, some reforms are good, some reforms are bad. But what we know about any reform, good or bad, that is transient, that it is a transient reform. And as the people in power giveth, they can take it away. So we can't rest on reforms, you know. There were many Black folks that went to college on everything from the GI Bill to affirmative action to the Negro college funds and set asides and quotas. And Black people, a lot of Black people went on to become middle class. But for every Black person that was elevated into the middle class, there were literally thousands of Africans who were either murdered or driven down deeper into policy. Same time they were giving the exceptional Negroes opportunities and letting them get into Harvard, they were dumping crack cocaine. So you give the government that has the power to do good for a few, still has the power to exploit the masses. And then a lot of those Negroes that went to Harvard because Dr. King took a bullet in the neck, you know, Malcolm took a shotgun blast to the chest to help those Negroes get to where they are. They got up there and they kicked over the ladder, including Clarence Thomas, who was a former, but Clarence Thomas used to be a member of the Black Panther Party. So that tells you what reform will do for you. Let's go. I'll try to hop back and forth between the two. I don't know what that means. Okay, people are really concerned about 5G. Erica says, people are really concerned about 5G, but there are issues of radiation that are presently being ignored. Don't take this as me making a light of 5G either. Here's the thing with 5G. I knew 5G was going to come up. 5G radiation is a misnomer. I hate to pull. This is a book that almost made me drop out of school. It's a book that I hate this book to this day. It's falling apart because I've done a lot of study in this book and I almost wanted to drop out of school. Just looking at it now gives me shake. But this is the 7th edition of Fundamentals of X-ray and Radium Physics. Now, what this book does, and it's by this physicist, Joseph Selman, is talk about the different forms of natural and man-made radiation and the different impacts it has on physical, non-physical, biological, non-biological substances, living tissue to non-living tissue. Now, according to this book, which is the Bible for people who use diagnostic radiation, people who use radiation, who create artificial radiation in order to do diagnostic, and people who do use radiation for treatment use this book. They have to get through radium physics, depending on the program. The programs I know of, all the programs I know of, use this book. Now, one thing, 5G radio waves They don't qualify. That is not radiation. Radiation has certain characteristics. The main characteristic that concerns us about as laymen about radiation is that it has to be ionizing, meaning that it has to, when it impacts a substance, and this happens whether it's metal or it's human flesh or animal flesh or a plant, is that it has to take electrons of the atoms and move them to a higher or lower power status, meaning it has to liberate electrons from an atom. And when you liberate electrons from an atom, you can do some things like literally metal becomes more coarse, it becomes more brittle and can break if you expose it to radiation. If you expose living tissue to radiation, it can cause it to mutate or disintegrate or metastasize and start to become cancer. RG waves are not that. They don't, up to this point, have any of those ionizing properties of radiation. Again, that's not saying that 5G does not have ill effects. And it's kind of hard to trust because the thing about 5G, as opposed to other forms like gamma radiation, X-ray, artificial radiation, things of that nature, is that 5G stands to generate trillions of dollars in profit for those people in power. They need 5G and even to elevate beyond 6 or 7G. And the 5G is generation. That doesn't really tell you anything. It's not like there's a 5 of something out there or 5 times stronger or whatever. 5 is just the 5th generation. And but it's a monumental leap because 5G is not just one step up from 4G. It's 4 to 10 times more intense than 4G. But even though the radio waves tend to be higher frequency, it's lower power. So they're going to need more towers to fuel or to drive the 5G than they did for 1, 2, 3, 4G because it's higher frequency but lower power. But I can't get into that. I mean, if y'all want to go over, if y'all want a presentation on radiation, radio frequencies, and their potential and the proven impacts on our biology and the potential impact on our biology, we can do that. But basically, as far as the harm that radiation does, that's not what we have to be concerned about 5G. Also, if 5G is affecting us, it's a relatively new study, but wait, what I was saying is because it is so profitable, we can conclude that even if it is dangerous, it will be implemented because the people who govern, the people who rule, have demonstrated in the past that they're willing to accept a pretty high risk of mortality and danger if the profits are there. So I have no doubt that multinational corporations and the governments that they fund would implement and disperse 5G, even if it's dangerous. They just need two things. They need to know that they have some type of provision for themselves and their offspring, and they need to know that it's going to generate profit. They're gone. They're going to run with that shit. So there have been some tests, and you could say, well, 5G causes cancer. Hell, walnuts cause cancer. You have to look at populations. There are some people that can be exposed to Chernobyl and have no ill effects and go on to live a normal life. And then you have some people that get a normal diagnostic chest x-ray and they develop some malignancy or some type of mutation in their cell. Everybody's different in terms of their toleration, how much radiation they can tolerate. But as of now, there have not been any studies. But in order to get those studies about how dangerous 5G is, you have to ask yourself, who funds the studies? And that pretty much tells you on the science. They knew about global warming 70 years ago, but the oil companies were funding the studies. And that the dangers of global warming and high-level carbon emission was suppressed for over half a century. They were suppressed for half a century. So I'm not saying that we should abandon our suspicion or paranoia about 5G. But one thing we do know that it's not radiation, and it doesn't impact us the same way as radiation because it's just not radiation. So that's one concern you can put on the shelf. We also know that there are certain sensitivities that some people have, or they call it the sick building syndrome, where you have environments that are exposed to electromagnetic fields and high frequency radio waves, and people experience everything from just having a malaise to frequent headaches. And they find when they move away from the tower, they move away from the high levels of electromagnetic fields, their symptoms removed. So there are some things there. They've been studying rats, and they found that male rats display some sensitivity, and they have everything from testicular to prostate issues when they're exposed to high levels of 5G. But again, that's a laboratory, and the planet Earth and your community, your home is not a fucking laboratory. So whatever they say, there's nothing wrong in the laboratory, or everything went great in the laboratory, or it was a horrendous outcome in the laboratory. You still have to expand your testing and continue to collect data and review. And I would take everything about 5G that comes out with a grain of salt, whether people are saying it's harmless or people saying it's the end of all humanity. Generally, it's often, Occam's razor. The simplest answer is it's not the greatest thing, it's not the worst thing. There is potential for harm, but I think right now, as far as I'm concerned, there are so much more hazardous things going on. And the thing about 5G related to coronavirus, here's the thing. Even if, just like X-ray or gamma rays or alpha rays or any other type of, even solar radiation, those things can weaken your immune system. But generally, when you're exposed to something that weakens your immune system, you don't just get one. Everybody doesn't get one thing. So if I take 50 of y'all and put you in a room and expose you to some type of substance or some type of energy field that greatly weakens your immune system, you're all not going to catch the same diseases. Some of you have latent, like E. coli or certain latent things in your body that will take up, and ravage your body. Some of you have outdoor exposure. So when you find a population that is exposed to a toxic substance that damages their ability, their overall health and wellness, their homeostasis, you find a plethora of illnesses that pop up, from respiratory to digestive to ocular issues, oral, from malignancies and cancers. If someone's saying, well, there's this ongoing, everybody's getting the same disease, then you'll find it's pretty much a infectious thing. It's not an environmental thing. It's not an environmental pollution when it's a uniform thing like malaria. If everybody in the community gets malaria, then you pretty much know it's the mosquitoes that are passing it around. But when you expose someone to a toxic substance or a toxic radiation or environment, that in itself causes other things to happen. There's no uniform response to that. I don't know if I'm being clear about it. I'm trying to just make it use the most basic language I can. But so that's the thing. It's like tuberculosis. There are certain things you can do to make yourself more vulnerable to tuberculosis. But when you get tuberculosis, whether you were living it's from the sputum of an infected person. So whether you're around 5G or not. So the 5G thing, I'm happy that people are suspicious about 5G and any new technology or any new radio frequency or any new substance they put into our environment. I think people should be suspicious, to the point, or even paranoid. But I think when you make these leaps, coronavirus and 5G, you actually help the people who want to defend 5G. Because when you make an erroneous or an absurd connection, then everything else, so like let's say a year and a half from now, after 5G has been fully implemented, and there is some type of illness or some type of complication that arises, and then people are like, okay, 5G is causing fetal development issues. Fetuses are or formation or something else. And then people are like, oh, y'all said that shit about corona. And people are more likely to dismiss when the real evidence comes. So I'm not going to vouch and say 5G is safe. I don't know if 1, 2, 3, 4G were safe, you know, but I'm also going to not make false claims about what I don't know. I have my suspicions, not about corona and 5G, but that about this electromagnetic fields in general. But you know, it's also opportunity cost. What are the potential benefits versus the potential harm, you know, with that. So, but one thing I can tell you with all that, 5G is not radiation. It's not like solar X-ray. It's not like radiation. It doesn't fit the definition of what radiation is, and it will not harm you in the way that radiation harms you. There is no evidence tying it to coronavirus, and I know there's a lot of convincing charts showing the dispersal of 5G and the dispersal of but then again confusion. Again, it could be a psyop. You know, a lot of conspiracy theories in the Black community come out of the white nationalist community, and a lot of conspiracy theories in the white nationalist community come from the CIA as a deflection. You know, because if the government is like, if people are out here saying the Illuminati or the Bilderbergs or the demonic Masonic people are distributing guns to South Chicago, and then we're all looking for these boogeymen in cults and long robes, when it's just a local county sheriff, some people from the small arms lobbyists and other people that are not spooky, that don't sacrifice babies and drink their bloods, but men who go home and sit and eat their white wives' casserole. But we're not looking at him because he's not wearing a robe and he doesn't make the owl sign or whatever. You know, he doesn't do the Illuminati handshake. So when there is a problem and you give the wrong source, then you further distract and deflect people from the source. So, you know, if I wanted to pull a caper, that's just like that white man that went into the bank with the black mask, the realistic black mask, and was robbing banks as a black man. So, you know, if this coronavirus thing, if you're looking in and the real source of the spread of coronavirus, which I think is bureaucratic incompetence and bureaucratic capitalist corruption, and they put on a 5G mask and walk in and create this debacle, then we're all looking for 5G when, you know, the real culprits are standing right next to you, helping you to look for the 5G culprit. You know. But trust nothing. I saw some woman in a church. She had on these diamond earrings that said "Trust no bitch." I would change that to say "Trust no institutions of power," and trust no institutions that profit from any level of disruption or exploitation. You know, we have to be vigilant. You know, Nikki asks, "Do you think the U.S. will move forward on removing Maduro soon, now that they have charged him with hustling?" I don't think. Well, it's kind of hard to say. Do you think they would? That's like asking me, do I think R. Kelly would move forward with molesting young girls? They've already in the process. They've been fighting hard to remove him, so they've been moving forward. It ain't about moving forward. They're just employing different tactics. With Hugo Chavez, they tried to discredit Hugo Chavez. They were funding media. Like, if the media in Venezuela is right wing, like the media in Venezuela makes Fox News look like Democracy Now! It is still privatized, and they go on there and say everything from the Chavistas are cannibals and racist. It's the craziest thing, you know. And I'm just reading the translations, and man, if I could see it in the original language, it's probably worse. So they're not going to, as you say, move forward, because they're not trying to really move Maduro. They have found out that simply it's like removing Castro. Castro's been gone for years, but yet the Cuban Revolution is still going as strong as ever. And in fact, they're saying, you know, from his brother, from putting his younger brother in power, and then, you know, the secession of power has maintained Cuba's revolutionary fervor. So they found out that we got rid of Chavez. First, they tried to discredit him in the media. Then they tried to do an official old school coup d'etat. Send in the economic hitmen, send in the jackals, arm the military to unseat him. And they had a successful coup, but they couldn't sustain the coup. And so he came back to power. And to this day, I suspect that his cancer could have been another assassination, because if they had shot him with a bullet or sent him into exile, then he would have become a martyr. But he died of cancer, of this weird cancer, instant cancer, add water and stir, as Del Jones would say. So they unseated Maduro. They unseated Hugo Chavez. And the Chavista revolution continues. They economically hollowed out the country. And so killing the leader of the Chavistas is not enough, because after Hugo, they got Maduro, and there's at least half a dozen other, socialist leaders in that place. They've tried to hollow out the country economically. They've tried arming various factions. They tried to create an Obama-type character, a young, handsome, dynamic traitor, and have him run for president. And they even announced that he was president and started engaging with him as president. None of that has worked. So this narco-terrorism thing might be more of an excuse to send in either U.S. military or to send in military contractors like Prince, the brother of the education secretary, to send them in to militarily take over the country. Because simply removing the leader, they found that the movement, the Chavista or the Bolivarian revolution, is too entrenched to just take off the head. Some movements expand beyond just one leader. So Maduro is a representative of a movement. He's not the movement. So removing him. So I think they want to say he's a narco-terrorist. What comes next is saying that Venezuela is a narco state. So I think they're doing that to justify the disruption of the whole society, the upending of the whole society. It goes far beyond just removing Maduro, because they could have done that already. They've tried to do it. Andy Williams say, "Hey Diallo, what's your take on deacons of defense?" I respect what they did, and I admire what they did, but I wouldn't define it as revolutionary, because they were still. It was an integrationist movement. It was what I call militant, armed integrationism. But respect due. I think we still stand a lot to learn from such formations. I have utmost respect for them, but I wouldn't seek to repeat. A lot of these black gun clubs and things of that nature, it's a bunch of bullshit. Even like the Falun Gong folks and the Huey Newton gun club. Most of the modern day gun clubs are not really organized for collective defense and liberation. They are organized for individuals to arm themselves to protect their material possessions. Somebody coming for your car, somebody trying to kick in your door, take your jewelry, and you stay strapped up. That's more of the tone of most of these. I talked to one of the leaders of the concealed carry movement back when I first moved to Chicago. Concealed carry, small arms, all that shit was outlawed. It took a Supreme Court decision to allow for that in New York. And a lot of people that were lobbying for that, a lot of black men that were fighting for that, I talked to them and they said, if you arm the average black person in Chicago, 99% of their targets will be other black people. So even though they advocated educating black people on firearms usage and understanding firearms, they were hesitant to advocate for arming the entire black community. I think what's more important than guns is your consciousness. Give me 100 conscious black men more than a million fucking armed black men, and you can get more accomplished. And they're more a threat to the state. That's why the NRA and most of these white racist gun clubs encourage black people to fight for your Second Amendment rights. They don't give a shit about us having guns. They give a hell of a shit about us having, Pan-African revolutionary ideology. That's the thing. I think Malcolm is a good example of that. During the most racist time, we all saw that window of Malcolm X peeking out the window with the AK, the banana clip, and he's looking out the window. He wasn't looking out the window for white folks. He was looking out the window because members of the Nation of Islam had tried to firebomb and throw a gas bomb into the window where of the bedroom where his daughters were sleeping. So they didn't care nothing about the nation having guns and bombs because they knew the guns and bombs were aimed at other black people, Muslims, ex-Muslims who tried to lead the cult. And so, without the level of consciousness, the arms are as much a liability as they are a benefit. But all that to say, respect due to the deacons of defense. I think it was necessary and effective for that era, but in some ways that is no longer, it's kind of an obsolete formation, and we need to stop allowing the church or any type of religious or cult, I don't care if it's Islamic or Christian or even African spirituality, to be the fulcrum or the foundation for our organizational efforts. Our movements must be secular, inside and out, meaning you could believe whatever you want. You can pray to the flying spaghetti monster. But when it comes to the activities, taking care and handling the business and advancing the interest of African people, it must be aggressively, exclusively secular, rational. Okay, let's see where we are. I appreciate some really good questions. Reason is time. I appreciate all the serious and reasoning this time, but however, I just want to know when you're going to do another one of those skits or whatever you want to call it. I don't know what you're talking about, Ross. This is Bro.Diallo. Check me on April 1st of 2021. We'll see. April 1st, 2021. Or maybe, if I must come with you, if y'all must have that real knowledge. Okay. David asks, what are some tips to effectively organize? I find it difficult organizing my community. The first thing you need is to organize. Number one, you need an ideology. What is the ideological basis for your organization? What is it that you believe? How do you view the world? How do you view your status in the world? And where do you want to go? So you establish where you are, you establish where you desire to be, and your organizing is the bridge between where you are and where you wish to be. That's ideology. Are you a revolutionary? Are you a reformist? Are you nationalist? Are you militant? Are you nonviolent? Are you progressive? Once you have established your ideology, once you become conscious and say, this is where my community is, this is what my community is, because my community is the global African community. It ain't no south side of Chicago. That's it. But that's where I am. That's where I am right now. But so once you get these things laid out, you have to put it down in a short, concise, clear manner. You have to lay it out. This is, that's one thing about that you get from the old nation, the Nation of Islam under Elijah Muhammad. He said, what are Muslims? What we want. Who are we and what do we want? When you have that laid out, the first thing you need to do is find people that already resonate with your message. Say, I am a revolutionary Pan-Africanist. And you have to kind of detail, who will be down, who can't be down, this and that. You have to organize if you want to have an organization. Once the blueprint is laid out, once you have the blueprint, then you establish the framework. And so no matter what you believe, whether you on some Dr. Umar bullshit, or you on some Tariq bullshit, or you want to recreate the UNIA, or be a Garveyite, or you want to be, extremely regional, or you want to be local and say, listen, I can't deal with the world. I'm just trying to deal with this block or this neighborhood. Or I just want to deal with the issues of black men, or I just want to deal with the issues of black gay folk. Whatever your scope, once that's determined, you're going to find people that are already thinking like you. That organization might already exist. If you find that the organization already exists, you simply go become a part of that organization, and then you have to work to organize and radicalize that organization within, because you might have people that say, yes, I want Black people to be more secure. I want to deal with the poverty, the violence, the neglect, the self-hatred, the ignorance of my community. And you go join the organization and say, oh, this organization already exists. I don't have to create it. But, their tactics are obsolete. They still doing the same shit that Operation Push, or that line organization shit, or they're on some bourgeois Negro shit. So I joined the organization because their stated goals align with what I want to do, but I have to radicalize my organization. I joined a really good organization back in the 90s, the National Black United Front. But when I joined the Black United Front, they were founded in the 60s and early 70s. And they were on that 60s early, education, they were on it. Local governance, civics, they were on that shit. Too good, man. They were banging, knocking it out of the park. Cultivating the youth, the Sybil Fulani program, rites of passage program. But the one gaping hole I saw, that they had no ecological component. They had all this land. They weren't growing food. They even had a member in the organization, an elderly member of the organization, that had a 17-acre farm in Bonner Springs, Kansas, that wasn't even cultivating food. They were literally leasing the land out to white farmers to grow on that Black-owned land. So anyway, I've thought I want to do all the shit they are doing, but I want to bring ecology, veganism, green awareness, environmentalism. I wanted to make that an element. So when I joined, I followed the rules. I rose within the organization, and I opened a vegan restaurant with the support of the organization and all my earliest customers. My very first customer was the chairman of the organization. The first dollar we ever made was from the chairman. So I just enhanced. I didn't go in to change or to take over. I went in to enhance. And even to this day, even though I haven't been there, I haven't been a member of the organization, they still have that element going. They have the gardens. They still have, it's not as hardcore vegan. Many of the members became vegan. And a lot of those members in their 50s and 60s when I joined. A lot of them adopted vegan or holistic diet, holistic health. I went to the headquarters and started giving, monthly lectures on holistic health, helping people to transition to a diet. So then I didn't have to establish all that other stuff I listed in terms of ideology, the framework, the mission statement, and the rules and protocols and all that. I didn't have to do all that. And I was able to go in and get the help of people on the school board, and they already had their own African-centered charter school. And, we were able to make their diet. They didn't completely transition because there was pushback, but a more comprehensive, greener diet, if I can say so. That's one way. But man, there's so much to say with this organized. There's a book by Oba Takasha called The Art of Leadership that kind of breaks this down, because there's so much. Every element it's not really complex, but there's a lot of elements to it. And I just hate to give a incomplete answer to such a necessary question on effectively organizing. And the main thing with all of that, check out, there's 2 volumes work, Art of Leaderships, volume 1 and 2, which is a really base organizing book. There's a few others, but all that I said is, is part of that. But when you find it hard to organize in your community, focus on quality over quantity. It's best to have a small cadre of 4 or 5 people, which is what the hell I'm working with here in Chicago. I'm able to advance better with a small group of 4 or 5 people than when I was working, when I first got here, having dozens of people and relationships with multiple organizations. We had 3 cooperative enterprises, but I had to scale back and refine because the shit started going. And people in Chicago, and I know if you're in Chicago, you're mad, they have a strong tendency to cultism and cult of personality. And I was working with brothers that were in this Black Hebrew shit, And seeing we the original Hebrews and other people that had some irrational conclusions, but they wanted to do some good things, and that shit kept those barriers kept coming. So don't rush, don't rush, don't not I ain't but don't rush, don't get discouraged. I'm old as dirt, and I'm still feel like I'm in my infancy of organizing. I'm nowhere near where I want to be, and you're going to have ebb and flows. Like I said, I've been part of big, well-established organizations, small little cadres, large movements, and then little unseen background work that I do. So continue the work. The most important thing is you must learn and continue to learn from your successes and your failures. Focus on quality over uh, quantity. Identify your interest. Develop a wide array of tactics. Be willing to redraw and reassess. You have to be a guerrilla. You can't ever like put the stake in the ground and say, this is our stance. You got to be dynamic. You got to be fluid. That's revolutionary. You got to be a revolutionary guerrilla organizing. And you got to have a way. Media is very important, a way of outreach. And I don't care if you're throwing parties, you got a study group, you got a movie night. I don't care if you got a congregation you go and sit amongst. You got to have ongoing communications. You got to have independent, conscious, revolutionary media. I don't care if it's bringing progressive artists to town once a month. When I first got here, one of the first thing I organized was Intelligent Thoughts, which was a promotion. It wasn't really a company because we didn't generate revenues, but the first thing we did was Ain't Nobody's Fool's Day. So every April 1st, we would do a concert or a poetry reading or some type of event to commemorate the work of Gil Scott Heron, and we'd have local artists create art that was inspired by his music or his stance or his ideas. And most people just thought they were coming to a party. And then we started having lecture series. We brought lecturers from around the country. We brought lecturers from places like Sierra Leone. We brought Anthony Browder here, and we would go into various Black businesses and say, we want to set up a lecture hall and bring a Arthur here to do a lecture on their book inside. So we just started doing these public events to bring people together. And then we say, well, if you want to come party with us, you can also come work with us, and you have the garden. So it's incremental. It's very painful because a lot of movements in the Black community are boom and bust. We have an incident like one at a time when the execution of Troy Davis, people in Chicago were very moved by that. And a lot of people were mad as hell and they weren't going to take it anymore. And that fervor dissipates. When there was anytime a young Black person is murdered by the police, an unarmed Black teen or youth is murdered by the police, or there's some other atrocity. When Governor Rauner was in office, and we had Rauner on this side, and we had Mayor Rahm Emanuel, fascist, a Zionist fascist, a lot of people were active. Now we got a pretty competent Democratic mayor, and we got a competent Democratic governor, and he's reinstituted food stamps and things of that nature. And people the radical fervor has dissipated, and then the next time we get a open, overt fascist in office, people might, or the next time these pigs kill one of our children, you'll have people there. But you got to have your movement structure so that when you get this influx, you can put those people to work. But if they start to lose hope, or they just get disinterested, or other things come up for them, that when they do exit, that the work is somehow sustained at some level. And I probably created more questions than answers. We might have to do like specific work on that, or I can just write it out and get it out there, because the practical level of organizing is very important. And most of the best books on organizing are 20 to 30 years old. I don't think there's really a modern book for radical Black organizing, And I think every generation needs, because a lot of the books even the book I'm reading, those books are pre-Twitter. They were written before Twitter and social media. So yeah, I appreciate the question. I can't really do that question justice, but I hope you could take some of those points and put it together in a cohesive answer. Sorry, but I appreciate the question. So Danielle says, "Hi, Bro.Diallo. My question relates to your comments on Dr. Sebi being a quack. Do you disagree with his vegan alkaline diet recommendations? If so, why? Or do you disagree with his claim to cure disease?" Number one about Dr. Sebi, one of his claims, mucus is the source of all disease. That is not true. Mucus is not the source of all disease. Your body is full of mucus and is always full of mucus. And if you came up with a way to eliminate mucus from your body, you will greatly diminish your health, if not die. Your nasal passages, you have what they call mucosal membranes. Mucus is a very necessary excretion for the functioning of your body. Mucus lines your esophagus, your stomach, your large and small intestines. Women, mucus aligns. I guess you can't say it. Not just women have vaginas. I don't know. People with vaginas. I'm old. I'm trying to figure this shit out too, alongside you. People with vaginas, your vagina is coated with mucus. Your nose, not necessarily, even when you don't have a coat, your nose, your mouth has a mucosal layer. Mucus lubricates. Mucus contains healthy cells. It facilitates the protection of those cells, that external cells. It also facilitates the capturing of debris and toxins and viruses and harmful bacteria. Also, you have more bacterial cells in your body than you have human cells. Bacteria is symbiotic with your body. So if you do not have mucus for your bacteria, what they call your healthy flora to flourish in, you will create an environment for unhealthy and harmful bacteria and viruses. So the mucus being a source of all disease, and that you should do all you can to prevent the production of mucus, is absolutely dangerous and absurd. Number two, his insistence that all hybridized foods are harmful, and that we should only eat foods that come from, and I don't know how familiar you are with Sebi, but I've met Sebi personally. When I was living in Brooklyn, New York, he used to give libraries. My last fist fight, I bullshit you not, my last fist fight was with a fanatical Sebi supporter. And every time he'd see me, he'd be like, "You should be eating that. That's hybrid." And he was a friend of mine. My wife still likes this guy. She ain't loyal. But anyway, she's fond of him. But my last fist fight was with a Sebi fanatic who tries to live his life according to Sebi. But you can't live your life. I think the overall Sebi program was to get the people to adhere to his diet, because if you adhere to the Sebi diet and guidelines, you become dependent on Sebi products. You have to, almost impossible to fully adhere to the Sebi diet without going to the Usha Institute for certain products. It's impossible. So wait, the mucus thing, utter nonsense. Number two, what I say, hybrid foods. Humans, since the founding of agriculture, humans have been hybridizing vegetable plants. And Sebi was, as King Dita had told me, Sebi was a chain cannabis smoker. Cannabis is one of the most aggressively hybridized foods on the planet. So he didn't even adhere to his non-hybrid. Carrots, watermelons, avocados, broccoli. He thinks that you should eat primitive foods in their most natural state. But you're going to have hybridization if you engage in agriculture. So you would have to pretty much be a forager in order to fully adhere, which is not realistic, especially for somebody who lives in an urban or even suburban. And even if you live in rural Mississippi, where my wife's people are from, or go back to backwoods Mississippi, where my ancestors are from in the United States, you can't freaking live a hunter-gatherer life, which is what you would have to do. So if I wanted to have been advocating veganism for almost 30 years. I've owned 3 different vegan establishments. I've had a fully vegan catering company, a bookstore with a fully vegan cafe, and a fully vegan restaurant. I have worked with people to transition from a standard American diet to a vegan diet. I have been promoting veganism. But if you learn veganism from a sincere person, they will not tell you to eat such a diet. Well, you have to eat this particular diet, take these particular substances, and get these particular herbs that are not readily available in your community. So you got to come to the Usha Institute and pay me $30 for some tinctures. So that's it. The hybridized food, anti-hybridized food thing has no basis. There are many healthy and abundant foods that have been hybridized. Hybridizing is a natural biological process, which is different than GMOs. GMOs is taking cells and injecting cells from alien substances, literally putting pig DNA into a grapefruit, or putting fish DNA into a tomato, which is not possible without the gene gun. They literally have a gene gun. Well, so that is not hybridization. Hybridization was going on before humans ever even were aware of microscopic. Before Crick, those two racist eugenicists who gave us the DNA helix, Crick and the other cracker. They're not worthy having their names remembered because they supported Hitler and all that shit. But before the double helix and all that shit and the DNA was mapped, people were hybridizing plants. So that's another thing. There's several. His claims of cure, his claims of cure. Sebi never took or respected the community enough. Because if Sebi was able to accomplish what he claims he did, curing these diseases, all he needed was to journal. First of all, he needed the person, let's say cancer, because I'm not even going to get into him curing AIDS. Let's say he cured people of cancer. First of all, before you can have a cure, you got to have a diagnosis. So you have a patient that says, I've been diagnosed with stage 4 metastatic breast cancer that has spread to my lungs and spread to my liver. It's been diagnosed. Here are my CT scans, my contrast exams, and all my shit. I have this fucking disease. And then Sebi says, in a controlled environment, because you can't say I cured somebody of cancer and at the same time they were eating your diet, they were getting radiation, chemo, and other type of standard treatments at the same time. Like a lot of people, like, God cured I prayed when I found out I got cancer. I prayed and God cured my cancer, but your ass was getting chemo too. So you need a control group. This is basic science, the kind of science my son is doing right now with his little experiments, to make sure they're not getting any other treatments, that they haven't had any other interventions, they've been confirmed to have that disease, and then their curative measures are distributed to them within a controlled, recorded environment. And everything they eat is recorded, and hell, a lot of times their urine and feces is saved and examined. And then there would have to be a series of diagnostic tests as the person was implementing the Sebi cure to show a shrinkage of the tumor. There would have to be blood tests to show an elimination of the metastatic and the cancerous process. And sometimes cancer causes you to emit certain levels of hormones or certain antibodies that aren't there when the cancer is not there. And you would need all those tests and say, in this controlled environment, the person was diagnosed with the disease, the treatment was implemented within a controlled environment, and the patient's recovery was documented incrementally. They got weekly exams, x-rays, CT scans, MRIs, whatever the blood clot you want. And throughout that implementation in that controlled environment, and not only did I give them this cure, I invited 4 other trained nutritionists or scientists or just journalists, observers, scholars, independent people who were there. And I said, here's all the documents. Here's the patients. Here's the patient's diagnostic, their blood and the x-rays, everything. Boom, motherfucker. Boom. And nobody would be able to say shit to Sebi. Sebi never did that. Not that I know of. In fact, I've seen several Sebi testimonials. And for every positive Sebi testimonials, I know of 10 negative testimonials that ain't did shit. Remember, he cured Michael Jackson of his drug addiction just before Michael Jackson overdosed. Sebi was extremely charismatic. I've seen Sebi work a room. and his lectures are hella entertaining. He always tells us how he was obese, how he was impotent, and he had diabetes and all of this. He didn't even document his own recovery. I eat a vegan diet. But if I'm going to start to say the vegan diet is going to do anything but help reduce your carbon footprint, stop you from negatively contributing to the exploitation and unnecessary harm of other living creatures, help reduce your negative impact on that, and reduce your exposure and negative outcomes of meat consumption, dairy consumption, and other harmful food substances. That's all I can tell you. And you don't have to come to me for that. You can get your veggies from wherever you want to get them. There's no special way. So, and that's just the top 3 issues with Saban, and I go on down the line. I appreciate the fact that he was promoting plant-based diets to the community, but I don't even know if his impact was more negative or positive because of the absurd claims he made. When I had my cafe, there was a sister who had stage 4 brain cancer, and she was receiving chemo and radiation therapy. And her fiance was a mailman on our mail route, and he would come in there and start eating lunch, a vegan lunch. So he brought his fiance in there, and she started eating the food. And at the same time she started eating regularly vegan food, she started buying it from us. And my wife was showing her how to make certain things and certain, nutrient dense smoothies and shit. She went into remission. And she ran in there and was like, "You guys saved my life. My cancer's in remission." And I said, No, sister. Don't make that claim. We are not in a position. Don't go around telling people I had cancer and I went to Cafe C, and I discouraged her, because a real person that's about the health and well-being of their people and their community is not going to fucking take credit for something they can't confirm. And she was like, "Y'all had me eat those blueberries and those foods and the antioxidants." And I said, "I don't know. I think that this food might have contributed to your well-being, but I would never allow anyone." I've never even really told that story before. My wife was there and another friend of mine were there, and when she came in and said that, and I wouldn't allow her to say it. I said, "I appreciate your patronage. I appreciate the love you've shown and the support you're promoting to your community, but don't say that it cured you, and don't go around saying that it cured people. But even though it had positive effects for you, and I do think you could have positive effects, I don't claim no miraculous cures for nothing, faith healing or veganism. And when you try to make your way of life into a panacea like that, 9.8 times out of 10 is some exploit going on. So that's why I did say I think I might have said he was a quack, or I think King Dita might have said he was a quack, and I said I liked on it. But yeah, I have some serious issues with Dr. Sebi, how he proceeded to do things, and his overall legacy. And now we got this nonsense thinking about, oh, if you do a Sebi documentary, the government will assassinate you, and maybe, he was shot. I mean, Nipsey Hussle. Maybe if he wasn't a Crip and representing the Crip, Crips get shot all the fucking time, unfortunately. And even at his funeral, Snoop Dogg said God made a perfect Crip neighborhood nip. And his funeral was a Crip celebration. So, I think Occam's razor, the simplest solution might be the most obvious solution. He was still, regardless of his level of success, and then there's the class thing. We think that wealthy blacks should be exempt from shit that poor black people go through, even though they're doing the same shit that poor black people do. Excuse me. So I don't think Nipsey's death had anything to do with his work on the Sebi documentary. I think if someone does have evidence that it's bigger than Shitty Cuz, the guy who shot him, being hostile to him over some street fucking pointless, stupid street shit, I'm willing to hear it. But, I don't think Shitty Cuz, which was the nickname of the guy who shot him, was anything more than, I don't think it was that. And I don't think Nick Cannon is in any danger either as a result of the Sebi documentary. But the mystique, we love to build up these folklore heroes, and I can't stop people from being rational. The best books about imperialism. To be honest with you, some of the best books about imperialism are written by imperialists. Pro-imperialist books. Every time somebody asks me about a book, I start scanning my bookshelf. But I think the book Guns, Germs, and Steel, it's a book that is written to excuse and make excuses for it, but it details. Another really good book. Now, if I had to say one book, I'm not going to start running. I would say there's a book called Late Victorian Holocaust. And I know there's a lot of people, what about a lot of black folks wrote the books, but I'm from the school of it takes one to know one. So before you, it's like Dr. Clark said, when he went to Schomburg and said, teach me black history, he made him read white history first and what the white folks were saying about themselves in black history. And he's like, you got to know why it was necessary to exclude black people from history before you can really understand it, because you can read all this black shit and really not know, so anyway, I'm going to just answer your question. There's a book called Late Victorian Holocaust. And if you go and get a book that says this book is about imperialism, oftentimes they're not as good as books that tangentially talk about imperialism. So I'm not going to say that's my best book. I'm just trying to, look at God. Hold on a second. Here it is. And I didn't even plan on pulling this book out. I don't have any productive. This was not a prediction, but it was literally, I had just pulled this book out a little while ago. So you asked me about what's a good book. I don't know, the letters are bad. Late Victorian Holocaust. Late Victorian Holocaust. I've read through this book a couple of times. I can't let you borrow it because it got my notes in it. And I don't get, people don't be getting my books, but it's got my highlights and my notes in it. So I can't let you. But this is probably, I can't say it's the best book because as soon as I go offline, I'm going to think of 5 other books like, damn. So this is probably the best. When I talk to my wife / web developer is I want to put a series of books on the website, like on different topics, and just list book recommendations under different topics. But this is one of the best by Mike Davis. It's very clear. It's a very easy, concise read. Again, you have to take it with a grain of salt, but that's my answer. Deborah, what's the best way to raise your child in joint custody when you don't get along with your child's father? Shit. I don't know. I can't speak about it from personal experience. But the answer would be impossible to be comprehensive without knowing what the beef is, because you can not get along with your father because he is abusive and he's a sociopath, or you cannot get along with him because he's got poor hygiene, or you cannot get along with him because he tried to holler at your best friend. And each of those instances where you don't get along speak to different. But if you don't get along with the person, it's going to sound cliche. You have to prioritize the children. So if you both have the children's best interest at heart, then that should be what guides the decisions that are made. What is in the best interest of the children? My wife and I, because I'm a simp, if you ask the Dr. Umar supporters, I'm a simp. And you ask the people of the straight black pride movement, I'm a simp. Then when I debate these, because I'm a simp, our house doesn't run on a man being the authority. In fact, I got this video clip I want to show of a debate of my wife disagreeing with my divine king wisdom, and she having her own mind and her own thoughts on a very, very serious topic that's very serious to us. And we've had 1,000,001 debates. And in that exchange, she says, I'm glad this is finally on tape so everybody can see that I'm right. But anyway, yes, I said, look at God. It's mockingly. In fact, if you come to my house, Mitch, you'll hear a lot of blasphemy. My sons, when they're playing Mortal Kombat, will call on Jesus. And then they call on various manifestations of Jesus. but baby Jesus, old Jesus, black Jesus, white Jesus. Anyway, back to the parent thing. Made me lose my train of thought. But what was I saying? Oh, my wife and I, the man doesn't rule. The woman doesn't rule. We say that we want to have a rational relationship and have a rational household. So reason should govern the decisions we make when we diverge. Fortunately, we don't diverge often. But when we do diverge, we try to come up with the most reasonable argument. So she will present her argument and sometimes yell it and curse it and snap. You know how these sisters do, brothers. I ain't got to tell y'all. Anyway, but we say that reason will govern our house. And so if she has to say, hey, I want to go this way, and I'm like, no, we need to go this way, then we have to say who can come up with the most rational argument. So that's the hierarchy. Are you asking me? How long before you'll be done? Okay, I'll wrap it up in 5 minutes. I'll just wrap up this question. See what I mean? She heard me dropping this knowledge and she's trying to subvert. Anyway, what was I saying? So if you have a place where you are you have joint custody, I would try to say to the person, let's our yardstick. Let the judge, jury, and executioner of all things related be what we can say is the best interest of a child. We want our child to be happy. We want our child to be healthy. We want our child to be well educated. We want our child to be well exposed, well traveled. What are the things that you mutually want for your child? And then let's say the husband says, I also want him to be the next Michael Jordan. And you want him to be the next Picasso or piano player or brain surgeon. Then you have to give balance to those things. You say, fine, you go out and try to make the next Jordan, and I'm going to make the next gifted hands. I'm sorry, but I want my son to be the next gifted hands and brain surgeon. So you come up with what's in the best interest of the child, how best, and say, listen, you want him to chase balls. Let's give it some time. Let's look at his skill. Let's honestly evaluate, does he really have that potential? Is this just a fun outlet for him, or is this something he could take on to the stratosphere? And then when I put him in his science tutoring, let's balance it out and let's not pull him. And then let's, depending on the age of the child, let's incorporate him into the decision making. And we make our arguments to each other, we bring it to the child, and we make a mutual beneficial decision. And I'll commit to a certain level of compromise that you do. And if we got to keep a scorecard or whatever, you do that and say what's in the best interest of your child, and let that be the key thing, even if you hate his guts. If he's not willing to cooperate, or if what he defines as the best interest of the child to be against what you define to be the best interest of the child, and you're able to make all the passionate and reasonable arguments as to why what he wants for the child is bad or good, then that's when you have to take a opposition. Then you have to do what I call, which is something that has been demonized, intellectualize the problem. You have to kind of evaluate this individual for the person they are. What are their strong points, their weak points? Where are they vulnerable? What are they receptive to? What are they against? Who can you mobilize in your family or his family to be, your ally and to moving him in your way? And then you got to do warfare and manipulation and subversion and distraction. That's what you have to do. So if it can be peace, you do it peacefully. If it's not peacefully, then you start to employ all the mental weapons to get what's in the best interest of the child, not to get your way, but what's in the best interest of the child. But if you can both agree, say, we want what's best for the child, sit down and say, what is best for this child? And then when you say, well, on 15 of these points, 8 of them we fully agree on are best for this child. And for the 4 we don't agree on that you think are good and I don't, or I think are good and you don't, let's have an ongoing discussion and slowly cultivate a way to merge these two while we commit ourselves to fully implementing the 8 things that we fully agree on. That's the way I would do it. If I was in that situation, but again, this is theoretical. And the people who I've seen, because I got older brothers, and some cousins and some homies that have done the I can't stand my baby mama, but I love my kids. People in those situations, I've seen people do it effectively, and I've seen people do it ass backwards. So that would be my advice if I was in that situation. But anyway, this is the Bro.Diallo quarantine zone. Chauncey, I'll give you a call tomorrow. Let me call you because I don't know what time you be getting up, weird hours. I'll call you because I'm sleeping in during these quarantine times because I normally have to wake up at 5:30 in the morning, but during the quarantine, I've been getting up at like 9. Like, shoot, I'm like, man, life is different. So I might smoke weed or something, just things are different. Can you mind your business? My son looking at me. Can I help you? I'm setting up dinner. You in my business. I'm not. I'm setting up dinner. And listening to what I'm saying. Anyway, closing out. Gang. Yeah, I don't go to him all the time, and you're just trying to talk to him and me. Oh, you hear that? He said that when I interrupt him when he's doing something. See, kids today, boy, where's my shoe? Oh, here it is. Ugh. That's how my grandmother would. If you gonna throw that back, I'm on camera. I'm on camera. Okay. See, now after I just sat here and gave all. Okay, can I finish? After I give all that, forget everything I said about children. Can you believe a black child threw a house shoe back at a parent? That's the first time in black. You're not black. No black child would do that. No African child would do that in history. You know how many? Okay, can I'll talk to you after I finish the show. Oh, anyway, this is the end. Got to play my outro music, and y'all have a good evening. Well, I'll be back. I'll be back. Hopefully Friday, but if not, soon. Again, Chauncey, shout out. Give me a. No, I'm gonna call you. Don't call me, man, because I don't want to be woke up by the phone. So I'm about to have dinner. Erica, what you making? See how she pasta. She makes spaghetti, pasta, linguine. That's all the same damn thing. She think I'm. Anyway, good night, y'all. I always forget how to end this thing. There we go.